In our previous video, we gave an overview of the entire budget template, and we talked about that there were three sections, the top being the information around the property info, the next section being the vendor, and then the last section being the GC section. Today, on this video, we're going to focus on the vendor section. The vendor section is set up and to distinguish between a vendor and GC. Generally speaking, when we're in this vendor section, we're dealing with turnkey contractors. These are contractors that we are basically paying them just as a turnkey. Labor and materials are all included in the price that we've established here. In the GC section, when we go through that, you'll see that that is broken out into labor and materials, because the GC, we are specifically just paying them labor. We're not paying for them for materials. We're buying the materials ourselves. The section and the sheet is actually set up here with, you can see vendor items, item description, SKU, item amount, quantity, and total. And the center section, the item description, if you'll see right there at the top, that is one that can be updated. Those that can be changed as far as they can add more information or change some of that text around when they're doing the budget. They have set up some things within this to make it more streamlined for the budget department, so that, for instance, they're not having to go in and type the same item over and over and over again, every time that they do a budget. So there are certain things that are set up like that by default. You'll notice there at the top, things like designer, plan expedite, architect, miscellaneous fees, permits, that type of stuff. There's not a default description in there, and they even changed the color of it so that it reminds them, if they are going to add something there, that they will go in and put in an item description so that we know what it is that they're actually calling for in the budget. And when they actually type something in that field, it changes to the regular black and white field, like the rest of the sheet. The item amount, that is normally it's an established amount that we have for certain items. And then the quantity. The quantity is really important throughout this sheet, because even though you might have a line item that has an item amount, until there is something put in the quantity, it does not carry over into the total. And until there's something that actually shows up in the total, that will keep that line item from showing up in the scope. So for instance, you've got the lock change lockbox. So we've got it, up to 4 sets and a lockbox. So they've got $250 in there, and there's a quantity of 1, which then carries over and puts $250 in the budget. If there's not a quantity, like in the next line item there for a full-scale home inspection, even though there's $300 that is kind of the default number in the budget, if we were needing it, there is no quantity, so nothing carries over, so that scope item would not show up in the final scope for this. Okay? So the quantity is very important, because that's how they go through and they can make adjustments. They can adjust those quantities up and down depending upon what the case might be. They might see that, hey, we don't need a 30-yard dumpster, or we don't need 2 30-yard dumpsters, like you can see that's kind of by default in that line item. They could go in and zero out where it has the 2 in the 30-yard dumpster, and they might put a quantity of 1 in the 15-yard dumpster. That's how they can adjust it. They can move things around in the budget. They can adjust the item amount as well, but a lot of these, like I said, are kind of default things that are set up, agreed upon pricing that we have with certain contractors. The other thing is out here in the scope and notes. You'll see that there's the opportunity for them to go in and put in notes and describe possibly why it is that they included something in the scope, or to give clarification for what it is that's being called out in that scope. And a good example is down here, if we go to the landscaping, and if you read across, you see basic, cut, trim, blow grass, and then there's an amount of $75, and then they've got a quantity of 6. So your question might be, well, where is that coming from? What do they want from that? Well, if you go over to the notes, you can see that in this one, because it is one of those kind of default items, But they put in here basic landscaping to include up to 6 bi-weekly cut, trim, and blow grass during renovation. That way we have a contractor that's or in the budget where we can have a landscaping company maintain the yard while we're doing the renovation. Then if you go down, you can see some of the other things around, landscaping, where if you get even down to right here, post-rehab landscaping, and there's an established dollar amount of $900, so they only put a quantity of 1, and that carries over, because what that $900, again, if you go right here, that's including lawn maintenance for up to 12 weeks. So post-renovation, when we're finished with the property, we have the contractor already set up so that between the time we finish renovation until the time a tenant moves into the property, we actually have this set up in the budget to go ahead and have somebody there to maintain the yard and the lawn and everything else, so that it is, rent ready at all times. Any of these line items, as you go down through here, like I said, they can go in and they can make some adjustments to them. And again, you'll see some of them do not have a dollar amount associated with them. So that's where the budget team will go in and put in a dollar amount. That's where they're also needing sometimes information from the BPM walk, because they might put something in the budget. When you go through and do the BPM walk, there might be something that you think there needs to be more money allocated to that line item. That's where your feedback is very vital from that BPM walk to give them some feedback. Again, it's the final decision on whether or not we are going to increase budgets and change things around does go back to the budget team, but that is definite feedback that you as a PM can give to them during that BPM walk. The other thing that I wanted to bring out here is you'll see that there's things like glass and windows. And you're also going to see the possibility of line items being included for things like glass and windows, electrical, different items along those lines that they could show up either in the GC or they could show up here in the vendor section. The thinking behind it and the way the budget is built, there could be instances where instead of just having the GC replace a window or do some sort of glass work or whatever else, we might need to bring in a specific vendor that's going to replace maybe a custom window or something along those lines. So that's where you could end up with glass window work that is here in the vendor section. But you could also end up with glass and window work that's in the GC section. Again, when it comes to the BPM walk, that's where you can give feedback, because if you walk the scope and you feel like your GC is capable of doing the work, you can let the budget team know and say, hey, we're going to move that money from this window vendor and we're going to move it down into the GC and let the GC do it. So it adds to their scope, it adds to the GC's budget amount, that type of stuff. The same thing can hold true. You can actually move items from the GC back up into the vendor section. So there are some times that you're going to see what you would think of are duplicate line items, but what it is, it just depends on the scope, the scale, the complexity, those types of things. It could even be something around that the work is going to require somebody that is licensed and we're going to have to pull a permit, that type of stuff. That again, that would be something that we would put in the vendor section because we're going to specifically bring in an electrician to do the work. Whereas if all we're doing is replacing a few outlets, that might be something that just shows up in the GC section as far as some of the electrical work. But as we continue scrolling down, you can see the different areas of, pool, fill, HVAC, plumbing, even into the flooring section, because we do use specific flooring vendors that they would go in and they can put in the quantity as far as the square footage of the rooms. So you can see how we've got everything broken out by room in the flooring section. They can actually go in and just change the quantities according to the square footage, and that gives them the baseline as far as the budget for that flooring. And then even some miscellaneous type things. Towing vehicles away. Any kind of abandoned vehicles that are on the property. We need to include that in the budget. So that's one of those. You can see we've got a kind of a standard amount, but they would actually have to go in and they can update it by putting in the quantity. Then things, bathroom tub tile and spray. That is another one of those things that's a specific contractor that we're going to bring in. We tend to stay away from letting GCs do any kind of bath refinishing type work, that type of stuff. And then, all the way down at the bottom, garage door. And then you can see how it adds up that column right down there at the bottom of the sheet to give you visibility to what that total is. That is the vendor section. And the next section we're going to go through is the GC section. And we'll break down how we view things a little bit differently, how we pay differently to the GCs, and how we break the scope down a little bit different when it comes to them and the type of work that they're doing and the scope that they're going to be working on.